Welcome everybody. We are so glad that our Faith Lutheran Church family and friends are joining us online today. We are here because we've been through quite a time with our intentional leadership transition along with COVID. And so today we just want to update everybody because not everybody is updated. And so we will go over a few things. The first thing is just a little review of the transition process. And then we're going to talk a bit about the transition with Pastor Ken and me over the first 2 months, the second 2 months, and the third 2 months. Then we're going to also look at the kind of the dreams and visions we have for Faith Lutheran Church, and then finally conclude with some of the celebration events that are coming up. So I'm going to throw it over to Jesse and to Kyle as they talk to us about just the process, how it began and how it unfolded in the midst of this COVID time.
So the process was very interesting for me and for a lot of the rest of us, because Pastor Ken's been in office since the beginning of this church, and we'd never done this before. So we started talking about it, and we talked about it for a couple of years before we actually did anything. And then we realized that, you know, it's time to start putting things together and getting moving, but we didn't really have a good feel for how to go about it. We contacted the Texas district office and asked them, you know, there's certain processes that they have that we had to provide, certain information we had to provide in order for them to give us a list of pastors to call. So we created a nominating committee. Nominating committee gathered a bunch of people, and we got a call committee out of that. We also got a very necessary thing, which was our call committee prayer team, which supported the process and weren't physically involved with the actual call document process, but they were instrumental, I believe, in our success. And prior to all this, because we didn't know what we were doing, Pastor Ken had the presence of mind. He had heard of a guy named Will Heath, and we invited Will Heath out because his specialty was walking churches through this process. And it's different for different churches, it's different for different denominations. What he did was he helped us establish what kind of a transition we were going to have. And that was, I think, vital to our success as well. So what that gave us was a framework to work from, and it also taught us a lot about ourselves. We learned what we had to work on in order to be ready once we had a new pastor in place. So we went through 6 weeks of training, and it was incredibly valuable. And Will Heath remains available to this day to help us with any bumps in the road we encounter. We've had to use that a couple of times, but initially we came to the conclusion that what we wanted was an overlap. We figured, and based on the exercises we did for Will Heath, we came to realize that we needed some overlap where we had 2 pastors on campus in order to be able to efficiently make the transition from one pastor to another and with the minimal amount of disruption. So that's sort of how we got started. We started with, the call committee did its job. One of the first things we had to do was a survey. Took a look at what was important in a pastor for our church. And this was a congregational survey called a pastoral survey. And it basically helped us determine what kind of a pastor we were looking for to replace Pastor Ken. It was very interesting. Again, none of us had been through any of this before, so we did the survey. Results came around pretty quickly. We also did an area survey of the Sugar Land area to see what kind of demographics we had and what kind of people we might try to attract. Because one of the things we intentionally are moving toward is we want to grow this church. and outreach is important. It always has been to this church, but outreach is a big part of this. And so the pastoral survey helped us identify a pastor that was going to help us achieve that. And that combined with sort of a framework to work from with Will Heath, which established the overlap. We were off and running, but it was an incredibly challenging process. Aspects of it took a long time. Just waiting for certain district communications took a while. And when we got to the end of it, the call committee put in a ton of work interviewing pastors on the phone, processing paperwork, processing surveys, and we arrived at, when it was all said and done, 2 candidates that were as close to what we thought we needed as we could get. And these 2 candidates we determined we were gonna bring to church to interview. So the first man we brought out, was a nice guy, and he and his wife came out and we visited for a weekend, and the overall impression that everybody got from him was he's a very nice guy. He viewed himself as a teaching pastor, and what he was not a growing and reach out into the community pastor. And so the second pastor we interviewed was Pastor Jeff WUERTZ and his wife Karen. And I remember vividly coming to that interview and being surprised. He was incredibly prepared. He came with a stack of questions, and we talked and talked and talked and talked. And one of the things that was very interesting to me was he asked us about the church a little bit, but mostly he asked us about us. And that's kind of how I knew, and how we all knew, I think, that this was a guy that we were going to extend a call to. So.
Yeah. Speaking about the call of Pastor Jeff, now that we know how it came to be, I think the Lord helped us to go through the whole process, because as a small church, we involved a lot of the cross-section of the church in the process of making the decision. I think it was a wise thing, because it actually showed the flavor of the type of pastor we wanted to have. And the survey was also helpful. The elders were supportive in prayers and working with the leadership team as well. How we evaluated the 2 pastors were pretty much based on the survey, which was a pastor that was passionate about outreach, a pastor that wanted to had a desire and has already been doing mentoring and leadership coaching, training, a pastor that is spirit-led and also knows what is going on and addressing those issues, also involved in spiritual development of the people. We also had the desire to reach out and care for the members, to the elderly and all the other folks. Pastor Jeff was very passionate about reaching out to families with children or kids or teenagers, and that's pretty much very, very distinct about him. He was also full of passion, like Cal said, wanting to know about us. He was asking about what we're doing, what our desires are. He even asked us, have we been to other churches to see what's going on there, things like that. So that really took us to a different level. But just to summarize everything, we were very happy with the spirit and with his desire to grow the church. Having said that, the process had to continue. This was not a decision that a single group made. I remember that before we made that decision, the leadership team, the elders, the call committee, the prayer committee, prayer team of the call committee, we all met, and we talked about it. He wanted to make some changes as things he desired to do, because he believed that those things are going to grow the church. One of them was having a change in the flavor of the church, of one of the service, that allowed him, or that we think will allow him, to make it a conversational service, as well as to reach out to people that are not typically Lutheran members. And the other was the issue of, and part of it was the issue of having communion every Sunday. He was very flexible, that we could allow the first service to go as it were, and focus the second service to address the issue was concerned about, or passionate about, which is to reach out to people in our in Sugar Land. The other thing that he also suggested, and those are the next thing that he asked was, if we're willing to support a younger pastor, that he would be able to mentor to address the needs of younger family, because as you know, he has grown-up kids. So we thought those were very considerate, and that were really valuable questions. We know these were going to be challenging. We're not used to that things were going to be changing. As a matter of fact, we already committed that during the transition there were not going to be any change. So now we are caught between these two tensions. We have a pastor that we think is the ideal candidate. We've committed that there's not going to be change. Now he wants to make changes. So, but having said that, when we met, we decided that whatever the case, we believe the Lord will lead us through the process. That the desire that he had was not a bad thing. It was just a different thing from what we had expected. So that's how we moved with the flow. And he came with his wife, like we said, and we
and the dogs. Don't forget the
yeah,
dogs.
okay, all right. So that was. I don't know how we communicated. I think the leadership team wrote him a letter and said after all the group met, we all unanimously agreed that he was the right candidate, and I believe that was when we moved to the congregational meeting where we just you can talk more about that.
We had identified what we wanted, or who we wanted. One of the things that came out of that was we ended up conducting a second interview with Pastor WUERTZ, because this has to work for not just for us, but for him and his family as well. So there were additional question and answer period, and while all this was going on, we were working feverishly with the elders and the call committee under support from the call committee prayer team to kind of organize how things were going to go when we got here. Okay. Second interview, we got down into the nitty gritty of some of the church business and some of the ways things were going to be different. And so we talked some about how we were going to get from where we were to where we wanted to end up, and some of the timing for that. And throughout all of this, Pastor Ken was incredibly supportive, okay? This was really important to all of us. And so initially the plan was, okay, he's going to do, the transition coaching that we went through, struck a chord with Pastor Jeff, and he said, it'd probably be helpful for me to do with my home congregation that I'm leaving, to have a transition with the fellow that's going to replace me. So that process started, which gave us, as it turns out, we had planned on the transition happening in January, and this pushed it back, and it turned out that that was a good thing. God knows what we need more than we do, right? Because it gave us some more time to prepare. And right about the time everything was set up to happen, we'd been having meetings and we had planned out the services of installation and the celebrations we were going to have and how everything was going to fit into this 6-month process of overlap. And then of course we had a pandemic virus event, which radically altered all the plans that we had made for how this was gonna go. Even before Pastor Jeff got here, services had been moved largely to an online format and for the protection of us and our members. And we had an okay website, and we had already started some broadcasting of the late service, but this forced us to evolve an online presence in a matter of weeks that we didn't have the equipment for or the skill set for. Thank God we had Monique Walker, who'd been working with Pastor on the Dove Song project for a couple of years, there to help us. I had no idea what we were doing. I still, the details are fuzzy to me, but evolving the service into something that was palatable in an online format has been challenging, but again, God provided us the right people in the right positions to help us do that. The Kellers were instrumental in making all that work. Really all the music and praise and worship team people have been just great in making this something that's working for us. So.
Right, yeah. So just to take it off from where we started, so the online service format started, and I also just as we've been talking about him wanting to make some changes with the coronavirus thing, we decided to stop serving communion anyways. So as that continued when Pastor Jeff joined us, and we started doing the physical church in one form or the other. We just it was a decision that the elders and the leadership made, and said, well, this change has been forced upon us anyway, so it's okay to just continue with that flow, since this was something we needed to do, but we didn't have a perfect situation. But since we have started, we no longer have communion, that we should use the moment and use it to phase in what we desire to achieve in the long term. So it was not a deliberate that we calculated to do. So ideally, we would have planned a long time, did all the change process, but it was what it was, and we trusted the Lord that because of the fellowship we've been having in the church, that the trust was there to allow that process to just naturally flow to a point where we begin to have communion as was determined, as well as the changes to the second service. Actually, the other changes to the second service was about the meet and greet time that happens within the two, especially the second service. That was another change that Pastor Jeff has suggested, because he wanted the service to flow and allow us to do fellowship either before or also after the second service. So those two things just naturally just flow. So we use the moment for the coronavirus and the coming back of the church to do both of them. What we did not plan for was the reaction. I'll call it the reaction to those changes, and which we are still going through now. I know Pastor Ken and Pastor Jeff will have more to say on what messages they did towards that. But in short, the pastors have been making every effort to to address the change process and how the history of the church, the 49
Watershed.
yeah, the 49 watershed moment, and how those things are not just accident, but the story of the church unfolding, and how we as ourselves should be open to changes, because the kingdom is about the Lord, and we're just the Lord's people, and we just need to move with the Lord, So, if you have another thing to add to that.
No, I think that pretty much covers it. The communion issue was an interesting one to me. Apparently, as far as Missouri Synod Lutheran churches go, having communion every Sunday is not as common, my understanding. I haven't been to a whole whackload of different Missouri Synod Lutheran churches, but the ones I've had experience with generally did communion on the first and third Sundays of each month. And then, so it was an infrequent thing, where we do it both services every Sunday, every month. And Pastor Jeff advised us that there are certain things about the sacrament of communion. It's a very holy and personal thing. But for someone who is unchurched coming in from the outside, it'd be a little scary. A little off-putting maybe, until they get to understand what it's about. And so one of the things he recommended was let's do communion once a month. We'll kind of ease into it some, but the reason we want to do this is to provide a service that is a little more palatable to somebody who is coming to us from the outside. And I'll let him speak a little more to the reasoning behind that. What we didn't anticipate was the impact that would have on the congregation. And we thought we'd go ahead and try it on the heels of our coronavirus shutdown, because we weren't having communion anyway. We were having it online. And so a lot of folks in our congregation said, hey, wait a minute, what are we doing here? So Pastor Jeff will explain a little bit more about that as he and Pastor Ken talk a little bit about their experiences with this transition and how it's flowing for them, and how we hope to arrive at a clean transition once the 6-month period's up. So,
Well, maybe I could quickly address some of that before we pass it off to Pastor Ken for the 222 transition that he's going to describe. I think the leadership was sensitive to that, because that was one of the things on my second visit that we talked about, and the leadership was very sensitive to how that might be processed by the congregation, that particular change. What happened was, you already made the changes because of COVID, and then you thought maybe, I think this is what happened. The leadership thought, well, since it's already been stopped, it'll be a natural opportunity to transition that way. Mm-hmm. Well, then as people came back, they were like, whoa, that's not what we anticipated. And that's when there was certainly a lot of sincere questions in grappling with that. And I can just say personally that I've been so blessed by how Pastor Ken and I, as we preached on some series about change in our own hearts, and people have really grappled with that. And I just think that shows a lot of maturity to really wrestle with God around that issue, and to see the changed hearts. Because as they see the bigger picture of what God's doing, that becomes so important, because we're trying to reach people who don't know Jesus. So I don't think the leadership was not sensitive to that. I think you were. I think COVID virus has messed up a whole lot of people's plans, including Nora. And with that, I'll just throw it over to Pastor Ken for that 2-2-2 transition.
Sure. I heard it said once that if you're learning how to fish in a boat, no problem. If you fish from a dock, no problem. It's going from the dock to the boat or boat to the dock that you run the risk of being unsteady. And there wasn't really, from my perspective, not a lot of reaction. But, you know, it doesn't take much movement in a boat to make everybody on boat feel a little bit anxious. But the design of the overlap, well, first of all, most churches don't know that's an option, or they're not able to do that. So a lot of churches are just a stop and go, and that leaves the new pastor coming in knowing no one, knowing none of the processes, etc. And so the other one is, if there's been a difficulty, there needs to be some kind of intentional interim where the man who comes and helps with that process is not a good long-term pastor. And to a man, everybody voted that we would have an intentional interim. And in dividing that up, if you could picture 5 lanes on a freeway, here's the entry ramp. Well, the new pastor, that's Pastor Jeff. It takes a while just to get up to speed, and that will continue for a prolonged period of time. It's not just the first stage of it. But the goal is to, and the leadership team worked hard at this. What are all the things we need to do to make sure that the traffic on the freeway is unimpeded? Did a lot of work around here and stuff that we needed to do that came out in that training process. So the goal was, in the first third of it, I would be doing more leading, Jeff walking and watching. In the middle 2, be kind of elbow to elbow, sharing things. And then the last third, I would be doing less and less. In fact, in the last third, I'll not need to be meeting when the leadership team meets to make future-issue decisions, because that's not going to be mine. And some other things I'll be tapering off as well, including how much time I have here. Spend on campus, that also will be tapering off somewhat. And the goal has been to give everybody on board a chance to begin to flow together. And then after everything is flowing together, for me to have a chance to kind of slow down and get off on the feeder road where I don't impede the traffic. That's been the goal, not to get an on-ramp so that the new pastor coming on, this is Pastor Jeff, that doesn't trip things up, and that my leaving also doesn't trip things up. So if there's a smooth transition, because books have been written that say when there's been a long-term pastorate, especially if the founding pastor is one who's still there, that's a difficulty for any congregation. And I think the genius and the insight, the inspiration that Will Heath brought to us was that's not the case unless the outgoing pastor, and that would be me, can't turn loose, or the incoming pastor, that's Pastor Jeff, doesn't honor the history. And you've heard him talk a lot about what's been built here. And in fact, this last thing he talked about, the number of people said, the Lord has loved me to wholeness here. And the third reason is if the church is unhealthy. Well, anybody is going to struggle with change. That's why we went those 2 weeks of dealing with the change process: shock, anger, resentment, acceptance, hope. And the goal is that we can get to the place, not even that you like everything that's changed, but you can say, you know, this is for a greater good. I can handle that. I can accept that. And then that settles things down. That's a matter of hope. So May and June were the first 2 months of it. July, August now in the middle, and then September, October will be the last of that last third of that transition. And I think I'm impressed that in many ways we're ahead of schedule. I mean, I think things are in place and clear and accepted by most people enough that we're well into it. And I'm not anxious at all about tapering time off here in August and September. The first week of August I'll be on vacation. The second week I'll be in Colorado with youth. So there's kind of a built-in break already there anyway. So I'm encouraged that we are where we are, and I also am deeply grateful that the Lord has used, including things like communion every Sunday, to build this love of the Lord in our hearts. For us, the difficulty is we really have needed to say, okay, Lord, you love me for the purpose of me loving somebody else, and to shift that love of the Lord towards people that we know who are pre-Christians, those who are yet to be saved. And that's where I see things going. And to do that, we need to be clear about the values and the vision we have. So
Yeah, that's kind of my area. And as we look at the future and the dreams, first thing I want to say is it's been great to work with the leadership team, the board of elders, and especially you, Pastor Ken, in terms of the transition. Pastor Ken has just been incredible in terms of partnership, and so that is really wonderful. And as we look to the future, the thing that I think of is, first of all, that this place has been described as a place where people come, have been loved and accepted, and loved to wholeness in Christ. And so we want to continue to build on that. I've also heard the stories from our own people about their own children, their own grandchildren that they really hurt for, because maybe those kids are struggling with marriage issues or parenting issues or health issues or even faith issues, right? And when you think about that, they aren't here. And not only aren't they here, but when you get into the millennials, and especially in a Generation Z, which is 21 and under, the numbers go way, way, way down as to how many are in the faith, walking with Christ. And so we want to be the kind of church, multi-generationally, that is there for not only our children and grandchildren, but other people's children and grandchildren who happen to live in our own community. And so to become that kind of church, it's a transition because the culture has shifted. And so we have to clarify our own identity, which we're using and doing with Monique Walker, who's helping us with the video of this. But the Board of Elders and the leadership team voted to actually hire her to assist us in that process, to connect with the community, to clarify our values. And I don't want to go through all the values right now on all of this, but the core direct value at the very heart and center is grace, right? This is a place of grace. And through grace, we become a place of community, because that's where grace gets lived out. It doesn't happen through the air. God works it through people. And so as he does so, community becomes a place of hospitality, which welcomes strangers. And so all of those become really core values, and we want to identify those, know what those core values are, how it influences what we invest our time in, what we invest our money in, how we reach out to this community. So that's the process we're kind of all involved in. And so what I would say to all the people listening to this is, here's what we need from you. First thing we need you to do is pray. And this is a praying place. We've already done some prayer and fasting, and there was beautiful results that came out of that. I'm just convinced. I've seen it. So all of you keep praying for all of us who are servant leaders in this congregation. That's not just the pastors, but it's the elders, the leadership team, the staff, because we're really excited at who God is all bringing together. So pray and then participate. If you can't be here yet, that's okay. Participate, get onto Facebook, or get onto our YouTube, which we're going to communicate that more. And especially if you haven't listened to some of the past videos, Pastor Ken talked about his video on change, his sermons on change. You need to listen to that. The 49 Watershed, the last 2 weeks, I did a message on that. 49 Watershed is the fact that the watershed event that changed the early church to reach out to non-Jews was in 49 AD. And we just started our 49th year. Could it be that God is doing another watershed thing right here at Faith Lutheran Church? I think he is. I think we all think he is. And so participate by getting online and listening to those messages, and look for your mail, because you're going to start getting the newsletter every month, and we want to update you, not only in video, because some people just want to read it, and that's good. I'm old school, so read up on what's going on here, and then contact us if you have questions, if you have concerns, or if you have things to celebrate. Let us know. Call Pastor Ken, call me, call the church. email us, do whatever you need to do, but keep in the loop. Just because we're socially distanced doesn't mean we have to be personally distanced. And that's what we want, because it's all about community. And so, and the last thing, celebrate. We want to celebrate the history, celebrate this transition, and celebrate what God's preparing for us in the future, because it's an exciting time to be at Faith Lutheran Church, and you're a part of it, because if you're not, we can't go forward. It's got to be all of us together. So that's the future. We're really excited about that, and so we just thank you for listening to us today. Hopefully it answers some of the questions that some of you had. Probably raise a few more questions. Contact us, let us know. We'll keep bringing more clarity. One of the things I've learned is clarity will do two things. Clarity will repel some people because they're like, ooh, I can't handle that. But it will attract people. And I think the more clear that we are about where God's taking, where we've been and where God's taking us, God's just going to continue to strengthen this body and enlarge this body as God brings new people as well.
Can I ask you a question that just kind of randomly came to my mind?
Sure.
When you first came and interviewed, you heard that we were going to have the old guy hang around for 6 months. What was your perception of that
Oh man, I was like, no way. But you know what? That's why we are lifelong learners, because we're always learning new things, and yeah, the transition has worked really well, and so yeah.
And some of those things we need to gather in special places, special ways, and special times. So there's a plan to have some celebration events of everything that brought us to this place, and then that final transition. My last son will be November 1st, and that'll be the passing of the keys, the baton, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And ceremonies are always good. God required Israel to do that. It's a way of anchoring something down in your memory where you remember what God has just done. You don't ever lose sight of that, because that's one of your benchmarks or your pinpoints out there in the coast. You know where you're going because you keep those movies in mind. And as those things get planned and on the calendar, we'll be letting everybody know, and they'll have a chance to gather around in that.
One last thing I just want to say. Hey, if any of you have children or grandchildren that are in this area and they're not in a church or not connected, please let me know, because I'll call them and I'll try and contact them. And you never know. We'll pray, contact, and see what God does. Any final words?
Thanks very much for coming.
Yeah, we're excited.
It's a time of change in our country as well as in our church. There's a lot going on, and not just the virus and not just upcoming elections. The world is evolving. It seems like everything's kind of picked up the pace. But we're happy you're here. You don't feel new to me anymore, which is good.
We're halfway through the transition.
We are halfway through the transition, folks. So
Yeah.
bring us your celebrations. Bring us whatever you can, okay? Whatever your needs are, and we'll get through this together.
And some people wondered, what do old pastors do? Listen, I'll be still living in the house. I'll be having time to catch up on garden and things like that I haven't been doing, but probably for the next year after November, I won't be around here at all. This is still a home church. We'll still be tithing here, and we'll be elsewhere for about a year. That's an important time. The last thing Jeff would need would be for me to be sitting there and he'd say some sermon. I go, well, that would not be good. And that's an important thing, and I agreed with that from the very beginning. So here we go.
Yeah.
Two greater things we've ever seen before.
Amen.
So thanks, and God bless you all.